Hey guys, I'm Crystal with the Journey Series podcast again. I'm wearing a black top shirt with a white and red stripes, and I have a brown background and a shelf with a clock.
And I'm Mark. I'm a brown man wearing brown shirt in front of background with a painting and some knickknacks. And I've got glasses on.
So today we're going to be talking to Leah, and she's had awesome experiences, and she is in Washington right now, but she does a lot of stuff overseas, and she's an author, and she's dealt with MS and have had a lot of awesome experiences talking to different people about that. So, welcome.
Thank you,
And
Crystal.
So
I'm Leah, and I have glasses on, and I have very, very silver white hair, curly hair. And there's a couple of pictures behind my head.
so why don't we start off with you telling us, Leah, a bit about your background and life before MS, if that's possible, and just tell us as much as you're able to. Guess.
Thank you. Well, life before MS seems like a really long time ago. I was diagnosed in 1987. So that's probably before you guys were even born. But no, Mark's shaking his head. No.
No.
So um, I was involved in the music business, and that's why I have this framed album hanging behind me. So I was a singer-songwriter and performed in clubs and around, and this was in the early 80s. It was an exciting time. I was living in the Seattle area, and this was sort of pre-grunge. So I like to say that I was the auntie to all of those bands, Pearl Jam and Nirvana and all that. And so that was my life. And then I developed a really bad headache and ended up going to see a doctor. And over the space of about a week, I went blind in my left eye and partially in my right eye. And back in the 80s, there wasn't as much medical data or information about multiple sclerosis. There was certainly no treatment. And but I thankfully had a neurologist who and an ophthalmologist who were pretty clear that was indeed what the situation, what was causing the optic neuritis. And so I was diagnosed. Um, I will never forget that moment when I was actually in the ophthalmologist's office and he put up the MRI black and white image on the light wall. And back then, MRI was very not as sophisticated as it is now. But I remember looking at that, all of those little dots up there, and thinking, wow, I am looking at my brain and how profoundly moving that was. And I got to say, it was kind of a relief to finally have an actual diagnosis for things that suddenly I realized, oh, yeah, there was this and there was that. And, you just didn't put it all together. But so life before MS was being I say this tongue in cheek, being a rock star. And then life after MS was filled with a lot of pain and a lot of uh, coping that, I was 30 years old and didn't really know. I was still a kid in my mind and acting like a kid, and it was really hard transition. My besides the optic neuritis, which subsequently subsided, and so I got most of my vision back, not all of it, but most of it. My primary symptom was pain, and it literally felt like I had a knife in my back. And to live with that level of chronic acute pain really messes with us as human beings. And it's very difficult for the people who love us and care about us to know how to help us, to know how to support us, to see us in that extremity, day after day. So I kind of lost everybody. My music partner, my boyfriend, my dearest friends, they couldn't stand it. So I kind of was left alone, and that, I think, more than anything, was the worst part of I think we all understand, what it's like to live differently and different with different kinds of abilities, and to the isolation that can cause. So that was really tough. And but out of that, I basically felt that I had things couldn't get any worse. So I began to live very fearlessly. I already had been living quite fearlessly. I mean, music industry in the 80s, you can imagine. But even more so, when certain opportunities to live overseas, or to travel, or to take certain kinds of jobs appeared, I would take it, because what's the worst that could happen? It had already happened. What's the worst that could happen? I could die. And as we know, we often live with the thought of, that's not the worst thing that could happen, when we're dealing with, depression and pain and all of that. So so that's kind of my my origin story. How's that when it comes to MS?
Yeah.
And what what changed? You went through sort of this dark period once you were diagnosed, and continued as much as possible to live the way you were living. What changed in your mind?
I think so I've always been a creative person, and so before I when writing songs, you write lyrics for songs, and so that's a kind of rhythmic poetry, if you will. And so because I couldn't perform anymore, I just because of the pain and being blind and all of that, and losing my musical partners, losing my band, so I began to write poetry and found a lot of solace in that. And then over the years, the poetry, I had more and more to say, I guess, and so the poetry became longer and longer, and then became prose. And so now I'm writing novels.
Which is an excellent segue, and an outlet to be able to not just talk about how you feel, but other fun stuff you can do. And maybe you were on a different path of not being able to do it musically anymore, but you still have the ability to be able to put down words, and in your poetry, and then eventually into a book or
Yes.
books. So
Yes,
so
I'm very lucky that I had that skill set, already inside me.
Would you say is the same, or has it changed in any way? Like your feeling about that ability, or even the nature of the ability itself? Has it changed for you in any way?
Gosh, it's been so long, Mark. It's been decades, since I've been. I mean, MS now is just it's just a part of who I am. It's not something that happened to me. I
Right.
have
It's
white hair, I have hazel eyes, and I
it
have
becomes
MS.
your identity, yeah.
And
Mhm.
so that's something that I think was challenging. Well, I was very, very lucky that the progress of the disease was relatively mild for a long time. I did, again, dealing with that pain, but discovering meditation and returning to Southeast Asia, where I was born and lived as a child, I learned some tools like meditation and visualization that really helped with coping with the pain.
Yeah.
Um, Yet, I I guess oh, I forgot what I was the tangent that I was on. but but
We were
I,
talking about the parallels of how you were doing music and then poetry and
yeah.
stuff.
So thank you. The I think to have some kind of way to um, express oneself independent of one's physical self in a creative way. You don't have to be good at it. You don't have to have anybody look at it. You don't have to sell it. You don't have to make a career out of it. But it's such a wonderful outlet to explore, drawing or whatever it is. Um, so I was able to do that in the last, I would say, 5 years or 6 years. The disability, I hate using that word, but the disease has progressed so that I'm not able to drive. I can't walk very far without help. But so my world has gotten a lot smaller. Um, but because I live in this crazy imaginative brain of mine, that's not as terrible as it might seem to people who only get their nourishment from climbing mountains or rafting down a river. I still love nature, but I can experience nature sitting on my front porch. So
Right. Definitely, it's a gift whenever you're able to use it to help yourself and be able to make an outlet, but also on the other side of that, you're being relatable and you're helping people come out of their shell and realize that their disability is not the end and they have so much more to offer. Even though society makes that hard to see, um, if they seek internally, and through reading, being able to mindfully think of all the things that they can still do without the voices in the world, um, telling you you can't do this, you can't do that. That's a very powerful thing that you're invoking.
thank you.
And
I feel that.
the other thing about that is there's so much importance put on the physical, like climbing a mountain or doing whatever. But in reality, when you sit down and really spend time, you realize that in your mind, there are no limits. You could go to the moon tomorrow if you wanted to. You're not limited by a physical mountain or whatever.
Mhm.
And quite frankly, that's what I do when I write. I go to all these different countries, these different
Yeah.
places. I mean, sure, most of them I've been before, so I work with memories, but you know, to fuel that. But you
Right.
can make it all up too. So,
Mhm. Yeah, but oftentimes I feel like I've talked to a lot more people that are disabled that are create creatively able to um it would seem like somebody normal would have to make up some of the stuff that we deal with, or some of the situations we have, you know, that we're able to talk about that they can't. So they oftentimes are more creative, and it brings up good stories and good poetry and good music and, you know, lots of different things, and acting
absolutely.
even. Yeah.
Absolutely. It is true that um we are so influenced by the media and society of what normal means, and you know it's um I walk with a cane or a walker, and I see people, especially children, are willing to stare, but an adult will look and then look away quickly. And
Mhm.
I will have friends that or acquaintances that I've known for years who are afraid to ask me why I walk with a cane. And that just seems so, I don't know, it so sort of sad to me that people are fearful of being inappropriate, I guess. And people, of course, want to respect other people's boundaries. But when it's obvious that you are living differently, I think that should be discussed and people should be curious about it. What do you guys think?
I
Well, actually, I was about to bring that up because we talk a lot on this channel about those biases are generational. You know, our parents and their parents were taught that disability is a bad thing and we need to hide them away, or, you know, we need to put them in institutions. They're not really people, or, you know, whatever. But, you know, we aspire to on the channel to bring out those stories and show what kind of people, you know, that are out here and even if they have a disability, they do amazing things. And so we appreciate people like you that are able to do that. And then to not only just do it, but also talk about it or write about it.
I think there's right way and wrong way to approach that situation about talk to someone with a cane or whatever device it is or whatever issue it is. You know, if it's coming from a good place of genuine curiosity, like maybe instead of maybe asking someone why you're walking with the cane is okay, but starting the conversation by saying what's wrong with you is probably the wrong approach.
So I was bringing up that I don't know how much you know about us, but we have ataxia, which is a another type of neuro thing, kind of like MS or Parkinson's. It's just the same concept, but we definitely have some of the same issues, and I'm guessing that you probably deal with the same thing where people are very adamant about we're okay one day and we can walk just fine or talk just fine or whatever. And then the next day, we need all of that, and all that's messed up. And and we get so much judgment. And I'm sure you do as well.
Yes, and anyway, I am filled with gratitude that I have a husband, a partner who is very supportive and will, I used to work in politics, believe it or not, and some other things like that. So I uh, I haven't had to have a traditional 9 to 5 job to support myself. We had a child and raised the child, and so I'm very, very lucky. If I had to deal with the stress and the logistics of having a normal job, quote unquote, my life would be very different. So I'm sure that, many of the people on your channel, have got to, as well as you, have got to function in the so-called normal world with the so-called normal level of functionality, and how difficult that is. So I'm very grateful that I get to do what I love doing, and talking to people and being an advocate for. I mean, I'm an environmental advocate, but I'm also an advocate for living without fear and how important that is.
It is
Um,
very.
yeah, it is. You let I want to circle the wagons back a bit, and um, and so I know when you initially, as we've all experienced, as when you get diagnosed with a disability and can't do certain stuff, some people magically aren't there to answer your phone calls or they drop out of your life. And in the moment, it's really painful and really hard to cope with. Um, but in a longer view of things, some of these what seemed like curses initially end up being blessings. So, do you want to unpack that?
I'm
Well,
sure you have a lot to say about that. Go for it.
it's the silver lining. So when I was first diagnosed, I would talk to my neurologist and say, "So I have MS," and he refused to say, "You have MS." He said, "You have a touch of MS," and I would joke, "Oh, like a touch pregnant," and so that became our sort of joke, but it's learning how to sort of manage and navigate the horror. I mean, it's terrible, when you're sort of figuring stuff out for what your life is gonna, be like. Um, but in in hindsight, as you were saying, Mark, it's a very different lens, when we look at the time when I was living through, my 30s basically, and into 40s. It was horrific, and I would not wish that on anyone. But looking backwards, it's was a very, very important time because I I did I made choices and I went in directions that brought me to where I am right now. And so that is definitely the silver lining of their, so there are silver linings to the pandemic, that here we can be having this conversation on our computers, and whereas that, 5 years ago wouldn't be the situation. So it's always in the moment. The challenge is to survive the moment. And sometimes that is literally moment by moment. But then as we move a little bit away from that volcano of whatever it is, we can go, oh, isn't that volcano erupting kind of beautiful? and so that's been my experience.
When we were talking last time during the pre-interview, you mentioned your dislike of the word disability, and I think there was another word you mentioned. Forget what it was, but could you explain that or talk?
Well, disability is like the word disease, dis-ease, disability. So I feel like I'm dissing myself when I use those words, that I'm negating myself in a way. So I choose to live with ease, not dis-ease, and ability, not disability. And I don't mean to sound flippant. I understand the heavy nature of being able to turn that switch. And sometimes it is turning a switch, and sometimes it's not possible. But some days, right? Some days it is possible to flip that switch and go and to say, I don't have a disease, I have ease. I don't have a disability, I have ability, and making that choice in the way that we think about ourselves when we look in the mirror.
I think internally it's important to know that for sure. But when we're talking generationally, and how people understand the wordage that was used, over until now, you know, we can't look down on. I mean, that was just what they were taught and what they thought was appropriate. Now, if you are aware of the issues and the stigma behind those particular words, and going forward, you still use it in a derogatory way, now that's a problem. But if you grew up, say you're my grandma, or you're 80, and you're used to the word cripple, fine. I'm not going to call you out for it. That is your experience of what you knew. And if that's how you need to word it, if that's how you need to identify me in your mind, that's fine. I'm not going to try to change you, but I think if you mentally understand that stuff and you want to try to change your wording, I think that's great,
And it's if you really think about it, words that we use today, they've been drilled into our heads in schools, but essentially the words were made up by people ourselves who had an idea and decided to give meaning to word, and then they spread it around through dictionaries, and which in turn spread around through schools, and then in some cases beat us over the head with those meanings and those, right? But we have every right and every ability to redefine them and give them new meanings and new definitions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like I was saying, as long as we know as people not to take that internalized ableism that's been used on us and take that disability as negative and think about those positive terms associated with our own thoughts of disability, then that's going to change a lot of perspectives going forward.
I think we absolutely all of this is right along my thinking. I we we have so many little choices to make in the day, and to mindfulness is really helpful to sort of slow down and say and think before you speak, and the golden rule and all of that. So you're talking about generational stuff. So those are old forms of ways to express compassion, right? Is to be careful, and I would say that people who are differently abled perhaps have a greater capacity for compassion because they have to find it. We have to find it wherever we can, in our lives, and to be not take it too personally, but be righteously angry when the situation calls for it. And I think that's kind of what you were talking about a little bit earlier, Mark, as far as, where are people coming from when they're asking me, what's wrong with you, or why do you, use a cane? I mean, we have to sort of sense that where that questioning is coming from, but for sure.
I was watching an interesting video or short about in the disability community, um, on the history of um, handicapped. Do you know where that came from?
No, tell me.
So,
You mean the term handicapped?
mhm.
I know you
So
handicap horses at the races.
right, exactly. The races, it had to do with being an equalizing force. The hand and the cap was something they used in horse racing to give everybody an equal playing field. So I didn't know that. I always looked at handicapped as being like a derogatory kind of thing, but that gave me a whole new perspective on it. And that's something I talk about a lot too, is doing research and finding out things, before you give it something a negative connotation to it, um, because it can be so enlightening if you don't,
Well,
if you do look it up.
well, we're talking about language here, right? Which is my fascination. Well, one of my fascinations, and language is very, very powerful way of, there are many other ways to communicate other than language. But what our face, our expression, our how we're smelling. When I get nervous, anyway, that's TMI. But I think there are lots of ways to communicate, but language is the one that we as humanoids, or hominins, or whatever it is we are, that is not unique to us, but certainly elevates us. And arguably, language is civilization, is an indication of civilization, and how we use that language, that we can be cautious with it, or we can use it like sticks and stones.
Yeah.
They break
Well,
my bones.
elevates some of us. But here's the funny thing is these days the a big topic of conversation is AI, right? Or you could take any tool you want you or any technology and use it for good or use it for bad. And we're concerned about all these big things, but language is a huge thing that we use every day. And we can use it to build people up or use it to control them or use it to instigate them, or we can do tons of things with it.
And as I understand, artificial intelligence is that it is language with a capital L. I mean, I've been researching this because for a number of reasons, but mainly because my next book has an AI component to it. But it's that basically, again, I'm not an expert, but as I understand it, what AI does is it can reduce everything to code, which is a binary language, a type of language. And if everything that we know as reality can be reduced to that simple language, that's kind of marvelous and terrifying at the same time.
Definitely. Yeah, but that's up to us as humans to
Right.
do it in a positive way. Are we going to go forward with the world doing it negatively and taking advantage and harming humanity, and extincting ourselves? Or are we gonna use it for good and to advance things and to do better for society?
That's the ultimate point, is that AI or language or whatever you want to talk about, they're just tools. They aren't good, they aren't bad. They just are. And it's up to us to infuse morality on them, because they have there's nothing there. It's just a tool.
Yep.
Yep.
Anything else, Mark?
Um, no.
Is there anything else you wanted to talk about? Do you want to do the promoting of your stuff now?
Sure. Yeah. So thank you. I got some very exciting news yesterday. I received a message that my published book that is out now, it's called The Foreigner's Confession, and it is a dual timeline story set in Civil War era Cambodia. And it is a finalist for the Nancy Pearl Book Award here in the
Wow.
Pacific Northwest. So I was very excited about that.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So that book came out, and the why that particular book might be of interest to your to this channel is that I wrote my main protagonist as having an amputation, and there are and like I was saying earlier, I have MS in the same way that I have white hair. Well, my character has an amputation in the same way that she has blue eyes. So she moves through the story, and the amputation or her is not, it's almost like it's like her shoes. So it's not the story. It's just part of her. And the reason that she went to Cambodia in the first place was to help victims of landmines, and Cambodia has the highest per capita incidence of victims of landmines. When I was researching this story, I interviewed a number of young women who with amputations, and this one particular woman, Nicole, who lives in Australia, she lost both her legs when she was a teenager, and she has a very full life. She swims and she has a family, and she made sure to drill home to me the point that she has an amputation. She's not an amputee. And so getting back to language, that how important that was. So my character actually quotes Nicole in the book, as far as how she identifies, if you will. We talk about how we identify a lot these days, right? So she does not identify as being an amputee. She just happens to have an amputation. So my story, like I say, set in Cambodia, and this woman has a very unusual experience, discovers a portrait of a woman from, there's no way that they could know one another or they ever meet one another, but they look exactly the same, and their lives become entwined in this very sort of mystical, transcendent way. So that's the story, The Foreigner's Confession, which is out now. I have another book which will be coming out in about 6 weeks or so, which is called The Worth of a Ruby. And that book is set in Myanmar, Burma, which is where I was born and lived as a child and opened a restaurant and etc. A lot of my life is there. And there, the disability, if you will, is related to mental illness and childhood trauma. So my characters are struggling with heavy stuff, and I like to write using conflict zones as a backdrop, because I believe that mirrors what we go through every day in our lives. We are navigating conflicts. So that's why I thought what you guys talk about would be, your listeners, your participants might be interested in the kind of stories that I write. So that's why I think we found one another.
Yeah. And perhaps a launching point for getting into those conflicts is it all starts with language and those first impression kind of, those seemingly innocent things like ableism and other isms that create the fuel for these conflicts.
Yes, imperialism, all the isms. My husband he works a corporate job, but he does art on the side, and he did a project all about isms because there are just so many isms, and he and I are both fascinated. He's originally from Serbia in former Yugoslavia, and he has a very different lens on the world than I do as an American. And it's very interesting to think about evil and how evil lives in our everyday lives. And I think about stuff like, did Hitler's mom, when she was breastfeeding him, look at her little Adolphe and think, oh, see that he had some horrible stain? Probably not. So we are all capable of horrible things given the right set of circumstances. And yes, definitely language is a match to to a conflagration that is just waiting to happen.
Why I think it's so awesome what you're doing, and it's brilliant because the parallels, while they're not quite the same, they are in some ways because the language being spoken between countries is what starts wars. The language that is used between ableist or able-bodied people and disabled people and each other is also a language problem, and it can start not wars but can start division.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to show the conflict in war is how that can have really bad consequences, and it can parallel.
Agreed. So I don't know what else to talk about. I don't.
I think is that
did,
all right? I think we have some really good. Anything
do you
else
have
you
some
want
juicy stuff to work with? I can talk a lot if I have to, or if you want me to. I don't know, but I appreciate this, opportunity to know you guys in this, very sort of two-dimensional way, and to you know I respect what you're doing, which is being unapologetically, here we are, and we're going to talk about it, and that circles around to what we first started talking about of the people who are cautious or afraid or nervous about talking about disability. And I think that we should, I don't know, say it out loud a lot.
right. We need to have these difficult conversations and be able to dialogue.
Speaking of, you mentioned how, we are doing this podcast to and sort of speaking about these things, and in relation to hidden blessings, those people who maybe didn't treat us as well as they could have or should have, and cast us out of their circles or whatever, we're actually kind of doing us a favor because then this happened, you know? And this was born out of that pain and that struggle and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the silver lining, right? I mean, it really is. I mean, when you can peel away all those layers of hubris and extra, and become more authentic and more honest, I think is always, again, looking in hindsight, it is a gift. So all those meanies, go be stupid together somewhere else.
Well, it was nice talking to you, Lya. We could certainly talk for a long time about all these topics. Thanks for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
You're so welcome.
Bye.
Bye.